Picture this. You are standing in a room that smells of stale whiskey, sweat, and sawdust. It's not a courtroom, not really. It's the largest room in the dusty, God-forsaken town of Redemption. A place where justice is as scarce as water. You are Ilara. Your dress is torn and stained with soot, a grim map of the life you barely escaped. Before you, a man they call a judge, his face a leathery mask of pragmatism, bangs a gavel on a rickety table. The sound is a crack of thunder in the tense silence. To your left stands Mayor Thompson of Black Creek, the town you fled. His suit is immaculate, his smile a predator's gleam. He claims you are his property, an indentured servant bound to him by a debt you can never repay. He says the fire at the mine, the one that took everything from you, was a tragic accident. You know it was murder. You saw his men bar the doors. Now, in this new town, he has cornered you, his legal papers like a hangman's noose. The judge, a man named Miller, squints at the papers, then at you. He sees a lone woman, a survivor, with the wolf at her throat. He is a man of the law, but the law out here is a wild, untamed thing. He clears his throat. Mayor Thompson, your claim appears valid under Black Creek's jurisdiction. However, this is Redemption. We have our own statutes. He pulls a dusty ledger forward. The Territorial Settlement Act, Article 4. To encourage stable homesteads and protect the vulnerable, any unmarried woman of sound mind, finding herself without protectorate or property, may claim a husband from the unpledged men of the township. The Union, once declared, supersedes all prior contracts of servitude. A collective gasp fills the room. Thompson's face darkens. The judge's decree is a desperate gamble, a legal loophole large enough to ride a horse through. He gestures to the room, filled with rough miners and grim-faced ranchers, their eyes now fixed on you with a new, calculating hunger. The choice, Judge Miller says, his voice heavy, is yours. Miss, your heart hammers against your ribs. This is not a rescue. It is a choice of cages. The men stare, their expressions a mix of pity and avarice. They are strangers, their intentions hidden behind calloused hands and sun-beaten faces. Then you see him. In the corner, flanked by 2 deputies, is a man in chains. He is tall and broad-shouldered, but it's the stillness about him that commands your attention. His clothes are worn, his face etched with lines of hardship and a sorrow so deep it seems to have carved itself into his bones. A faint, white scar runs from the corner of his left eye to his jaw, a permanent mark of some forgotten violence. While every other man in the room looks at you like a prize to be won, he does not. His gaze is level, his gray eyes holding not a flicker of desire, but a profound, shared weariness. He is a prisoner, shackled. But in his eyes you see a strange kind of freedom, the freedom of a man who has already lost everything and is no longer afraid. The judge is waiting. Thompson is smiling, certain you will falter, that you will choose no one and fall back into his grasp. You take a deep breath, the dust filling your lungs. You raise a trembling hand and point, not to the eager faces in the crowd, but to the silent figure in the corner. Him, you say, your voice clear and unwavering. I choose the prisoner. The name of the man in chains was Silas. He was a rancher, accused of rustling cattle from Mayor Thompson's herds, a charge everyone with an ounce of sense knew was fabricated. Silas's land held the only reliable spring in the region, a lifeline Thompson had coveted for years. The charges were a convenience, a legal crowbar to pry him from his home. Now, that legal maneuvering had backfired spectacularly. Judge Miller, a man trapped by his own clever proclamation, slammed the gavel down. The marriage was recorded. The chains were struck from Silas's wrists, the heavy iron falling to the wooden floor with a clang that echoed like a breaking promise. He was a free man, but he was bound anew, this time to a ghost-eyed woman with fire in her past and desperation in her soul. He did not speak a word as they left the makeshift court, the furious glare of Mayor Thompson boring into their backs. He simply nodded once to the judge, a silent acknowledgement of the strange providence, and led Ilara out into the unforgiving glare of the sun. His horse was a sturdy roan, tied to a nearby post. With a quiet, almost gentle gesture, he helped her onto its back before swinging himself up behind her. The journey to his ranch was a silent one, measured by the rhythmic clop of hooves on the dry, cracked earth. The landscape was a harsh canvas of reds and browns, of jagged mesas and skeletal cacti reaching for a brassy sky. It was a land that tolerated life but did not welcome it. Alara felt a kinship with it. She, too, was scarred and weathered, stripped down to the bare essentials of survival. Silas's ranch was nestled in a small, sheltered valley, a patch of stubborn green in the vast expanse of desert. The cabin was small, built of dark, sturdy timber, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged like a weary shoulder. A once-tended garden was now choked with weeds, and the corral fence listed to one side. It was a place of profound neglect, a home hollowed out by grief. This, Alara learned in the quiet days that followed, was the heart of Silas's story. He had not always been alone. He spoke of his wife, Lena, and their young son, Daniel, in short, clipped sentences, the words catching in his throat like burrs. They were gone, taken by a fever that had swept through the valley 2 winters past. The silence they left behind was what had allowed Thompson's greed to take root. Silas was a man living in the past, a ghost in his own home, and the disrepair of his ranch was a reflection of the disrepair of his spirit. Their first days together were a pantomime of coexistence. They moved around each other with the careful grace of wounded animals. There were no pretenses, no false comforts. He gave her the cabin's only bed, taking a thin blanket to the floor by the cold hearth without a word of complaint. She, in turn, began to impose a gentle order on the chaos. She started with the garden. Her hands, soft and unused to such labor, bled as she tore out the thorny weeds and turned the soil. But with each weed she pulled, she felt as if she were pulling out a sliver of the bitterness that had taken root in her own heart. She found a small patch of tenacious herbs, Lena's no doubt, and carefully nurtured them back to life. Silas watched her from a distance, his expression unreadable. He spent his days mending fences. His hammer blows a steady, percussive rhythm against the valley's silence. He worked with a relentless energy, as if trying to physically exhaust the pain that lived inside him. He was strong, his movements economical and sure, but there was a brittleness to him, a sense that if he stopped moving, he might shatter. One evening, a sudden storm rolled in, the sky turning a bruised purple. Wind howled through the valley, and rain lashed against the cabin. A loose shutter banged violently against the wall, the sound like a gunshot in the night. Alara flinched, a small cry escaping her lips as the memory of splintering wood and panicked screams from the mine fire surged through her. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fire was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for a sound, a smell, to bring it roaring back. Silas, who had been staring into the fire, was at her side in an instant. He didn't touch her, not at first. He simply knelt before her, his large frame a solid presence in the flickering light. "It's just the wind, Alara," he said, his voice low and steady, a tether in the chaos of her memory. "Just the wind and the rain. You're safe here." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of certainty that cut through her panic. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw past the stoic mask to the deep well of empathy in his gray eyes. He understood loss. He understood fear. Slowly, her trembling subsided. He reached out then, his calloused hand gently covering hers. His touch was not one of passion, but of profound human connection. It was a silent promise. You are not alone. That night, something shifted between them. The silence that had separated them began to transform into a comfortable quiet, a shared space where words were not always necessary. He started leaving a cup of hot, herbal tea for her by the hearth in the mornings, made from the herbs she had rescued in the garden. She started mending the tears in his work shirts, her stitches small and neat. He taught her how to properly saddle the roan, his hands guiding hers with a startling gentleness. She learned to read the sky from him, to know when a storm was coming, to understand the subtle language of the land. They began to talk, not of their pain, but around it. He told her about the spring, how it never ran dry, a miracle in this parched land. He spoke of the hawk that nested in the high rocks, a silent guardian of the valley. She told him about her father, a watchmaker, who had taught her the value of patience and precision. They were two broken people, slowly, carefully piecing themselves back together, and in doing so they began to piecing each other back together as well. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the mesas, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose, she finally told him about the fire. She spoke of the thick, oily smoke, the heat, the screams, and she spoke of Mayor Thompson, his face illuminated by the flames, a chillingly satisfied smile on his lips as he ordered the doors barred. As she spoke, Silas's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. The sorrow in his eyes was replaced by a cold, hard anger. He had known Thompson was a snake, but he hadn't known the true depth of his venom. "He framed me to get my water," Silas said, his voice a low growl. "He murdered all those people to get his insurance money and silence the workers who were demanding better wages. It's all connected." Elara looked at him, at the righteous fury that had finally burned through his grief. She saw the man he was before loss had hollowed him out. A protector, a man of unshakable integrity. "He will come for us, Silas," she whispered, the fear a cold knot in her stomach. "He won't let us be. I am a witness he can't afford to have, and you are a threat he can't afford to ignore." Silas stood up and looked out at the valley, his home. The land was healing under their care. The garden was sprouting new life. The fences were strong. He had been defending a memory, a grave. Now he had something to defend once more. He had someone to defend. He turned to her, his gray eyes clear and resolute. "Let him come," he said, and for the first time since she had met him, Elara saw not a prisoner, not a widower, but a warrior. "This time we will be ready." The peace they had carefully constructed was as fragile as a desert flower. It was shattered by the arrival of a rider from Redemption, a young deputy with a nervous disposition and a folded warrant in his hand. Judge Miller had sent him as a warning. Mayor Thompson had not been idle. He had traveled to the territorial capital, greased the right palms, and returned with a new authority. The warrant declared Silas's marriage to Elara null and void, citing coercion and Silas's status as a prisoner at the time of the union. It demanded Elara's immediate return to Thompson's custody to fulfill her indenture, and it ordered Silas's rearrest on the original charge of rustling, with new charges of abduction added for good measure. It was a death sentence, elegantly penned on official paper. "He's coming with a dozen men," the young deputy stammered, his eyes darting around the small, defiant ranch. "The judge can't stop him. He said to tell you the law has long arms, but sometimes a man's got to stand his ground on his own 2 feet." The message was clear. They were on their own. As the deputy galloped away, a dark line of clouds began to gather on the horizon, mirroring the approaching storm of men. The air grew heavy, charged with an electric tension. There was no more time for quiet healing. The war had come to their doorstep. Silas moved with a grim, purposeful efficiency. He was no longer the slow, grieving man Elara had first met. His movements were sharp, precise. He checked his rifle, a long-barreled Winchester, its wooden stock worn smooth with use. He retrieved a second pistol from a locked chest, handing it to Elara. Her hand trembled as she took it. She had never held a weapon before. "You remember what I showed you?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil he felt. "Point, aim, and don't hesitate. Hesitation is what gets you killed." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You don't have to do this, Elara. You can ride out the back of the valley. I can hold them off long enough for you to get away." Her fear was a living thing inside her, cold and sharp. But beneath it was a bedrock of resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She thought of the fire, of the feeling of utter helplessness as the doors were barred. She had been a victim then. She would not be one now. "You said we would be ready," she said. her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You said we—" A flicker of something, pride, admiration, something akin to love, warmed his eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. They worked together, barricading the cabin's windows, leaving only small slits to shoot through. They brought the horse into the small, sturdy barn. Every action was deliberate, a silent conversation between two people who understood precisely what was at stake. It was not just a piece of land and a spring. It was their last stand against a world that had tried to crush them. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, they arrived. A dozen riders, silhouetted against the bruised clouds, their forms dark and menacing. Mayor Thompson was at their head, his immaculate suit a jarring absurdity in the rugged landscape. He rode forward, stopping just outside of rifle range, a white flag of parley fluttering from his hand. "Silas!" he yelled, his voice slick with false confidence. "This can be over peacefully. Send out the woman and surrender yourself to the law, and I will be merciful." Silas stood behind the thick timber wall of his home, his rifle resting on the windowsill. "There's no law out here, Thompson. Only you and your greed. The law is what I say it is." Thompson roared, his civility fracturing. "I have a warrant. You are harboring a fugitive and my property. Send her out, or we will burn this valley to the ground." Alara stood beside Silas, her pistol held tight in both hands. She looked at the men behind Thompson. They were hired guns, their faces hard and emotionless. They were not defending the law. They were collecting a paycheck. "He won't stop," she whispered to Silas. "He will never stop." "I know," Silas replied grimly. He raised his voice. "This is your last chance, Thompson. Turn around and ride away. This is my land. She is my wife. You will not have either for a moment." There was only the sound of the wind whistling through the rocks. Then Thompson lowered the white flag. He sneered. "So be it." He raised his hand and dropped it. The first gunshot ripped through the evening air, splintering the wood just inches from Silas's head. The battle began. Gunfire erupted from both sides. The peaceful valley transformed into a cauldron of noise and violence. Silas was a master of his terrain. He moved from window to window, his shots measured and deadly. He wasn't aiming to kill, but to disable, to drive them back. He fired at the men's legs, at the horses, his Winchester barking a steady, defiant rhythm. Alara, her fear sublimated into pure focus, stood her ground. She fired the pistol, the recoil jarring her arm, but her aim was true. She forced two of the men to abandon their cover behind a water trough. They were a fortress of two, their small cabin an island of defiance against a tide of malice. But there were too many. Thompson's men began to advance, using the rocks and trees for cover, their bullets thudding into the cabin walls. A shot shattered the lantern inside, plunging them into near darkness, the only light coming from the muzzle flashes that lit the scene in hellish, strobing bursts. One of the hired guns made a rush for the door, an axe in his hand. Silas met him with a roar, firing his last bullet into the man's shoulder, sending him staggering back. But as he did, another shot rang out, and Silas cried out, clutching his side as he fell to one knee, blood blooming through his shirt. "Silas!" Alara screamed, rushing to him. The defense was broken. Thompson's men were closing in. It was over. But just as Thompson himself stepped forward, a triumphant smirk on his face, a new sound cut through the din of the fight, a thunder that was not from the storm. Over the ridge, a wave of riders appeared. At their head was Judge Miller, a shotgun held across his lap, and behind him were 24 townsfolk from Redemption, their faces set with grim determination. They had come. The law, the real law, the will of the people had arrived. Judge Miller's voice boomed across the valley, carrying the weight of true authority. "Thompson, by the authority of the Redemption Township and the territorial mandate, I order you and your men to lay down your arms. Your warrant is fraudulent. Your actions an act of unlawful aggression." Thompson spun around, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He saw the grim-faced ranchers and miners, Men he had dismissed as weak and inconsequential, now arrayed against him, armed and ready. His hired guns, seeing the overwhelming odds, began to lower their weapons. Their loyalty was to coin, not to a losing fight. All the fight drained out of Thompson in an instant. His power had always been an illusion, built on fear and corrupt paper. Faced with real, unified strength, it crumbled to dust. He was a man with a fancy suit and a losing hand. While the townsfolk disarmed Thompson's men, Judge Miller dismounted and strode towards the cabin. He looked at Silas, leaning against the doorframe, Elara pressing a strip of cloth to his wound. He looked at the bullet-riddled walls, at the two of them, battered but unbroken. A look of profound respect settled on the judge's weary features. "I said a man's got to stand on his own 2 feet, Miller said, his voice gruff. "Looks like you two held up the whole damned mountain." Silas managed a weak, pained smile. "We had some help." The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke. Rain poured down from the heavens, a clean, washing torrent. It fell on the righteous and the defeated alike, extinguishing the last embers of the gunfight and cleansing the valley of the scent of gunpowder and fear. It was a baptism, a promise of a new beginning. Thompson and his men were taken back to redemption, not as victors but as prisoners, to face a justice they could no longer buy or bully. Back at the ranch, the community that had saved them now worked to heal them. One of the ranchers, a man with surprisingly gentle hands, tended to Silas's wound, declaring it a clean shot that would mend with time. The women from the town brought food and blankets, their quiet, bustling energy filling the small cabin with a warmth it had not known in years. They helped Elara patch the bullet holes and sweep up the broken glass, their shared work a silent testament to their solidarity. Elara and Silas were no longer alone, isolated by their private griefs. They were part of something larger now, a family forged not by blood, but by a shared stand against the darkness. In the days that followed, as Silas recovered, the ranch became a hub of activity. The people of Redemption, inspired by their stand, helped him finish mending the fences, rebuild the corral, and clear the spring. They saw in Silas's defiant valley a reflection of their own hopes for a town built on integrity, not intimidation. The land and its people were healing together. One evening, weeks later, the valley was quiet again. The scars on the cabin walls were a reminder of the battle they had won. Silas, his arm in a sling but his step steady, stood with Elara on the porch. The garden she had tended was now in full bloom, a riot of color and life. The air was sweet with the scent of damp earth and blooming sage. They watched the sun set, the same sky that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving now a canvas of breathtaking beauty. He turned to her, his gray eyes soft in the fading light. The marriage had been a desperate act, a legal fiction born of necessity. But it had become something real. In defending the ranch, they had been defending each other, defending the fragile hope they had built together in the ruins of their past lives. "The judge said the marriage was legal after all," Silas said quietly. "He said any union forged in a trial by fire is as binding as they come." Elara looked up at him, at the faint scar on his face, at the strength and kindness that resided so deep within him. She had chosen the man in chains, and in doing so, she had found the freest man she had ever known. She had found her protector, her partner. She had found her home. She simply reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. No more words were needed. Their silence was no longer a space between two lonely people, but a shared peace, full and complete. "So, let me ask you a question. What are chains, really? Are they the steel forged in a blacksmith's fire, locked around a man's wrists? Or are they the invisible shackles we carry in our hearts, the chains of grief, of fear, of a past that tells us we are not worthy of a future? What is freedom? Is it a piece of paper signed by a judge, a decree that sets you free? Or is it a choice, a decision made in a moment of utter desperation to point at the one person who sees you, truly sees you, and say, 'With you, I choose to be free with you'?" The world will always have its Mayor Thompsons, those who believe that power gives them the right to own people, to own the land, to own the law itself. But what this story shows us is that the truest strength is never found in a single powerful man. It's found in the quiet resolve of two broken souls deciding to stand together. It's found when a community, tired of being afraid, decides to ride out into the storm for what is right. We all face our own valleys, our own fires. We all have moments where we are asked to choose our cage. But maybe, just maybe, the most courageous thing we can do is to choose each other. What do you think? Was Alara's choice an act of foolish desperation or profound wisdom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were moved by their story of survival and redemption, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.